This program is presented by the Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning at the University of San Francisco. The Fromm Institute, keeping up with the times no matter when.
Harry and Sally. We're going to just take Harry and Sally as a quintessential couple of any human culture across time and space and place. Let's say they have a whole bunch of kids and 4 of them survive. That's actually a good average, general average. And let's say those 4 kids grew up, got married, and had 4 kids that also survived. Oh. Yeah, how many grandchildren is that? 16. Yeah, that's a nightmare, isn't it? Yeah. All right. Well, let's suppose that Harry and Sally have been eating their veggies, taking daily walks, and they live long enough to see their grandchildren grow up, get married, and also have 4 kids. All right. So how many great-grandchildren do they have? This is a question I like to ask my students, and it's so much fun to watch the faces just freeze. Wait, that's math. We're musicians, we're not mathematicians. I always like to say for musicians, math is a 4-letter word. Count it, math, 4-letter word. Yes, it is indeed. So how many great-grandchildren do they have? 64, yes. That's a lot of Christmas presents to have. That's a lot of Christmas presents. I have to even think of having 64. Okay. At any rate, this means that there are now 64 related families that stem from Harry and Sally. Well, let's bid adieu to Harry and Sally, who are completely worn out about trying to think of new presents for their 64 great-grandchildren. The story goes on because the 64 great-grandchildren now grow up, they get married, they have a bunch of kids, 4 of whom survive. And how many great-great-grandchildren are there now? 256. That's the 4th generation. That's only 4 generations, 256. And let's go with the 3 great-great-great-grandchildren. That creates 5th generation. How many great-great-great-great-grandchildren? That's 1,024. Yes, there's somebody with really good math skills. That's excellent. That's right. Do you hire out? Do you do taxes? Right, all right. Then 6th generation, 4 kids each, we come up to 4,096. One more generation, the 7th generation, and it's 16,384 great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That means within 7 generations, there are 16,000 families that have a common ancestor. Just think of that. What we have here is a tribe. Do you see? This is a tribe. A tribe is a large number of related families that have a vague sense of their ancestor. They have generally a common language, some common customs. They have ham for Thanksgiving rather than turkey. In other words, again, they have some traditions as well. And traditionally, all of these families call themselves after their ancestor. So that would either be, they would call themselves the Harryans, or they would call themselves the Sallians. Exactly, very, very good. 16,000 families, and they all started when Harry met Sally. Thank you, very good. All right. Now, this happens across all of world history in all world cultures. Again, the same kind of dynamic. And let's say that, once again, in this little constellation here, there is a great-grandchild of Harry and Sally who's called Steve. And there's another great-grandchild who's called Susie. Okay, very good. Now, let's suppose that Steve and his wife and their children and grandchildren have a particularly close bond. In other words, each of the couples bakes Christmas cookies that blows everybody else out of the water. So this really, really strong bond of a family. And so let's say that once again the succession continues. 16 grandchildren and 64 great-grandchildren. It goes on and on and on. Okay, right. And so these two groups, because they have a strong sense of Stevie and Susie, they become a clan. You see? They're part of this larger tribe that become a clan, and so they call themselves the McStevies and the McSusies. All right. And so, again, this means that the families, as they continue to progress on, have very fond memories of Stevie and Susie. All right? Again, the McStevie and the McSusies, who are all part of the Harrian tribe, or the Salian tribe. Okay. Now, again, this is a common human phenomenon. You find this in all human cultures across world history. But let's also say that as bad fortune would have it, somewhere along the line, the McStevies clan and the McSusies clan get in each other's hair. And there's a little friction. It's about the dressing that you made for that ham, which was suspiciously like the dressing you're supposed to make for a turkey. All right. And from the disagreements comes a little sniping, comes a more emphatic metal kind of sniping, then more fighting, and eventually we've got a family feud going on between the two. Now notice the fact that they belong to the same tribe. There's no weight in the matter. The two clans basically hate each other. And this kind of thing has been going on in human history for as long as there have been stories. And this may explain a great deal about what happens to the Arabian world after Muhammad. Because Muhammad had been able to patch together alliances of hostile tribes and hostile clans. And these fragile alliances soon unraveled after his death. And this may help to explain a very, very odd fact. And that odd fact is the exclusion of Ali. Because you see, as some of you may have noticed, when I guaranteed you that you could tell the difference between the Sunni and the Shia, ultimately, it's all about him. There are those who don't want him, and there are those who do. And that's the simple truth. Again, the easy way to remember it is that Shia ends in A, which rhymes with A, which is the head of Ali. Okay? It's the easy way to remember it. But again, you see, it may help to explain something very odd. And that is that Ali, again, remember, he comes from a different clan. Muhammad and his wife take him in and raise him. Muhammad says that he is like a brother to me. Muhammad insists that he marry Fatima, again, Muhammad's daughter. And Ali would have been the logical choice to be a successor. He really would have, much more than any of the other three men that we've talked about. But the primary reason for his being excluded is the clan that he came from. It's the Banu Hashim clan, which, by the way, still exists today. And the Quraysh, even though, again, they belong to the same tribe, the clans in Mecca did not want him to rule over them because there was tremendous envy and tremendous jealousy between these two already. Again, the Quraysh would never allow a Hashim to rule over them. And so let's pick up where we left off on Thursday of last week. You will notice on this timeline that I gave to you that I've done a little bit of a recap, as is often the case, again, just in case there were a number of people who were not here last week. And then, in response to some requests, I've added some of the information I provided you at the end. For example, you will see on the second page, again, for those of you who have it. For those of you who don't, just lean over, introduce yourself, and look on your neighbors. You will see here, for example, again, the guidelines, the 10 rules of war, the 10 rules of war. I You know, I used to be really good at math when I was in school, but I have not been able to discern those 10 rules. When I count them, I don't come up with 10, but it could be just because I've been out of school for such a long time. Also a possibility. At any rate, you will see here again what becomes known as the 10 rules. And then the following Caliph Umar, again, the following Caliph Umar, who establishes again, his brilliance cannot be underestimated. He is the one that establishes the political and administrative system of this very rapidly growing new Muslim empire called the Caliphate. It's important to remember, however, that these Muslim armies are not invading empty areas. They are invading places such as Syria, Iraq, again part of the crumbling Sassanid Empire, and Egypt, all of which already have very, very well-established, very old political systems. In other words, what Umar largely does is he tweaks them, you see, and rearranges them slightly to make them more amenable to a Muslim world. I've added again, because of requests, the admonition which he gave to his appointed governors, again, do no harm, essentially, to his own universal responsibilities, and for fun, since there was some general interest, I thought I would provide you with some quotes that are attributed to Umar. For example, acquire knowledge and teach it to people. I'm trying. Okay. Be dignified, honest, and truthful. I'm trying that too. Avoidance of sin is lighter than the pain of remorse. Actually, I think that's probably true for any religion. Then we have, when you see that a scholar loves the world, then his scholarship is in doubt. Now, as an academic, I find that very profound, because I think there's a tremendous amount of truth to that. If only men were as jealous of knowledge as they are jealous of women. Luxury is an obstacle. Even if a man may be as straight as an arrow, he still has critics. I'm sure that all of you have felt this on many occasions. Then, of course, fear Allah, for that is fortune. Indifference to Allah is misfortune. And finally, be patient. Patience is a pillar of faith. Now, you recall that Umar did not die a natural death. He was assassinated. And the next Caliph, that is the next successor to Muhammad, once again, is not Ali, but a man named Uthman. Now, Uthman was the last of the great advisors. Again, this is the way we formulate it today. And I should probably just clarify in case you're wondering. Again, there are two major groups, the Sunni, who are against Ali, and the Shia, who are for Ali. Again, initially it's a question of successor. Then it becomes a question of who killed Fatima. Then the injuries and the insults and the misunderstandings, they begin to spiral out of control. So therefore, do you think there is a difference between the Sunni history writing and the Shia history? Yeah, yes, you can imagine. There's a huge difference. And sometimes if you go onto a specific, like even For example, if you go on the Wikipedia sites for any of these various individuals, it's not always immediately apparent who's writing, but I can guarantee you it's one or the other, and it's usually the Sunni. And so as a response, you may be delighted to know, there is not only Wikipedia, there is also Shiapedia. And they are the opposite take of the Sunni-dominated Wikipedia. Who knew? All right. At any rate, Uthman differs from his predecessor Umar in that Uthman puts his family members in these high positions. In other words, he gradually gets rid of the governors that this wise Umar had done, and he puts his own family and clan members instead. And why does he do it? To enrich his family. Exactly, very good. Again, I mentioned this, I just wanted to reiterate this one more time. Uthman is most famous for us, because he is the one that formulates the definitive Quran. Again, by this time, there are many, many different copies swirling about, copies on parchment, copies on bones, copies on stones. That, of course, is not the entire Quran because it's pretty huge, but rather, again, sayings here, sayings there. Ali himself, of course, was one of the scribes commissioned by Muhammad himself, who also submits his copy. And then Uthman and his advisors sort through these different versions, choose one, and then burn the rest, including Ali's. There is no animosity between these men at all. No, there isn't. Actually, Ali never acknowledged Uthman as caliph. That, of course, is very significant. And they often got into very, very strong arguments. Again, both of them, of course, live in Medina. So Uthman, again, chooses governors not because of their abilities, not because they want to serve the Muslims, but because, again, they're connected by family. And so in the Shia form, his reign is 12 years of mismanagement. In the Sunni form, he was a wonderful, wonderful caliph. All right. But you have to keep in mind what has happened. In the course of just a few years, some very large sections of two enormous empires have fallen into Muslim hands. And some of these areas are really, really rich. And what is the logical result? Is that increasingly it becomes more important to get a share of this wealth than to follow the ideals of Islam. It's a very, very logical result. And so indeed the Muslims, again, this is more a Shia interpretation than a Sunni, but nevertheless they emphasize that what had happened is that the caliphate, again, this large Muslim empire, increasingly is focused not on the moral teachings of Muhammad or the spiritual dimensions of his teachings, but becomes increasingly a symbol of, I quote, undiluted materialism and naked imperialism. And there is some truth to this. I mean, there's no question about it. In other words, what propelled them now was luxury. What propelled them now was not the ideals of Islam, but the lust to become rich and the lust to become powerful. So, under his reign, again, as you can see here, and you can also see here, is that under Uthman, the Islamic armies now sweep across North Africa. Now, North Africa is for us as blank as this map, aside, of course, from the red arrows. But in reality, with the collapse of the Roman Empire West, which of course had also controlled North Africa, a number of Germanic tribes had moved in here as well and had established a number of thriving, prosperous kingdoms, some of which are already 300 years old and which also collapsed within just a couple of years under the onslaught of these armies. So that within just 18 years, I mean, think of this, in just 18 years, a new sprawling empire has been created. Again, it's called the Caliphate. So again, just to reiterate, the religion of the Caliphate is Islam. Thank you. The language is Arabic. And the ruling aristocracy is Bedouin. Again, Bedouin warriors. And then in 656, angry crowds assemble in Medina, Egyptians, Syrians, Iraqis. Again, keep in mind that Medina at this time is the capital of this caliphate. It's a logical place. This is where Muhammad lived, where Muhammad taught, and where his successors lived and taught as well. And so these angry crowds gather in Medina. They lay siege to the palace of Uthman. They accuse him of being unfit to rule, and that his cronyism, this is a modern word, okay, but the cronyism has done tremendous damage and is setting a very poor moral example. They lay siege to his palace for 7 weeks, and then they break in and they murder him. And now there is in Medina chaos. It seems like nobody really wants to be caliph anymore all of a sudden. Why? Because the crowds are very, very restless. But the crowds, again, in this new succession crisis, they turn to Ali. They want Ali to take over the reins again of this enormous empire. And Ali seems to be strangely reluctant. This is actually very interesting. You would think he would jump at the chance because he has on numerous occasions articulated his frustration with the fact that he is constantly excluded. Although he does serve as advisor, certainly to Umar, certainly to Abu Bakr, not to Uthman. But Ali seems very reluctant. And as the crowds assemble and they insist and they assemble and they insist, he says, "Do you want me to rule like the other caliphs? Do you want me to rule like Muhammad?" And when the crowd calls its acclaim for Muhammad, Ali agrees. Because he says, "My purpose is to drive away all this corruption and to bring back the kingdom of peace on earth like my brother, father did." And so that's exactly, of course, what happens. As one Shia Muslim historian writes, the caliphate was not an ornament for Ali. Rather, Ali was the ornament of the caliphate. Isn't that interesting? And so again, he wants to end the graft in this government. He wants to end the graft, the anarchy in this land. And naturally, this means that he wants to get rid of all these people that Uthman has put into power. And so indeed, he tries to get rid of them, but many of them do not want to be get ridden of. Right, okay? For example, there's a man by the name of Muawiyah Umayyad. Now, in my classes at the conservatory, when, for example, I do this little segment, I say, it's sometimes difficult to name your children, right? To find new and interesting names. I said, this is one of the reasons why history is useful. I can provide you with all kinds of new names that you can name your children. For example, if you call your little boy, once you get married, right? If you call your little boy Muawiyah Umayyad, there will be nobody else in school that's going to have a name like that. He will be proud indeed. So Muawiyah Umayyad, of whom I have no picture, and actually I should also mention this as well. I have been adding pictures to these various individuals, like with Ali, as you see here, Muhammad earlier, Uthman, Abu Bakr, Umar. Technically, this is not legal because for some Muslim traditions, pictures are not allowed. However, I know there's a gasp, shock, dismay. I've been misleading you. No, actually, I haven't been misleading you. I just assumed that since we're in California, we're going to follow sort of the Western traditions of illustration. Okay, so this is actually, but they are genuine pictures, again. At any rate, in other words, for Uthman, for example, I took a book cover, as you may have noticed. For Muhammad, again, representation of him. And this actually is, from the Shia perspective, considered to be a portrait of Ali. It's actually from Turkey, the Shia part of Turkey, and it's an enormous poster, actually. It's about 10 feet tall. I thought that would qualify quite well. At any rate, and so, again, he tries to dismiss these various governors, but Muawiyah Umayyad, for example, does not want to be dismissed. Again, he is a man who is related to Uthman. They're actually cousins. He's related to Uthman. And so as soon as Ali sends messengers to Muawiyah, who is the governor of Syria in the ancient city of Damascus. As soon as the messengers begin to exchange, and you have to feel sorry for the messengers because they get in an argument. And so you can imagine the messengers are doing what? Running back and forth, back and forth, back and forth between Damascus and Medina. That's a long way. At any rate, so Muawiyah Umayyad says to Ali, "I will give you my loyalty when you have killed the murderers of my cousin." Now, the Shia historians say what Muayyima Umayyad is trying to do is create chaos. Because if Ali tries to pursue these men, find them, and there could have been hundreds involved, and punishes them, it's going to create backlash, it's going to create discord, it's going to create divisions among the people who supported him. In other words, that it is possible, it is indeed possible, that the reason why Muayyima Umayyad, yes, I know, say that 10 times really fast. The reasons why he wanted to do this is to make Ali's support so weak that he could become caliph himself. Again, we generally believe that this is true. And so, one of the other sidelights to this is actually very interesting, and Ali again is quite explicit. He says, first you give me loyalty, then together we will find the killers. It's actually very clever. But Ali also points out, Uthman sent all these men into these high positions of government, into all these high positions of government. When he was besieged in his palace, he sent for help, and not one of them replied. If they didn't provide Uthman with help, I certainly can't count on them myself. Great. So Ali again tries to de-Qurayshize the administration, and Caliph Ali, right here. This brings us to the daughter of Abu Bakr, Aisha. Now you recall that she was 6 years old when she married Muhammad, who was a tender 53. Again, Aisha marries Muhammad, again is to bring Abu Bakr and Muhammad into a greater alliance. And she is married to Muhammad after the death of Khadija. And she complains about this as she gets older. She said, although she had never seen Khadija, she was more jealous of her than of all the other wives of Muhammad that she could see. And indeed, she began to hate Khadija, the dead wife. By extension, she began to hate Fatima, who of course also dies. And by extension, she hates Ali and the grandchildren as well. Indeed, some historians say that as Muhammad lay dying, Aisha, his still young wife, is instrumental in getting her father as successor. Now notice this. Her father would succeed her dying husband. In some ways, it makes perfect sense. Again, in other words, she is, in many ways, one of the powers behind the throne. She is now 45 years old, and she is on a pilgrimage to Mecca when she hears the news that Uthman has been assassinated. She is stunned by this news. She's even more surprised to hear that Ali is not pursuing the murderers. And so she takes up arms against him. Literally. She is in Mecca. She allies with several other companions of Muhammad who had already grown immensely wealthy and who were very desirous to grow wealthier. They had their eye on the city of Basra. Again, for those of you who can see, there's Mecca, Medina, and up here along the coast of the Persian Gulf is the city of Basra. Again, it's a very, very wealthy region. And so what Aisha does is she raises about 12,000 troops. It's a remarkable number of Bedouin troops. Again, these companions are with her, and they begin to move up towards Basra. Now, the ostensible reason for this alliance is revenge for the murder of Uthman. The irony is that none of these companions, nor Aisha, are in any way related to him. Whereas the dead man's wife and his children do not appear to be in any hurry to follow the murderers. In other words, it is highly likely that she has other ideas in mind. Indeed, she herself does not have a son. She no longer has a living son, but she has a sister with a very handsome nephew to whom she is very, very attached. And so, in October of 656, they move up towards Basra, and Ali too is aware of this. Once again, he knows that Aisha hates him. He knows that these companions hate him, and he knows that they are going to form trouble. They will certainly not provide loyalty to him, and so he feels the necessity to meet them militarily. He tries to raise troops in Medina, where he has lived for the last 18 years, and he is able to raise about 700 men. Well, this is not going to go well. Nevertheless, Ali, clearly a very spiritual man, decides that God will help him, and so he begins to move towards Basra with his 700 warriors. And then he discovers that his two sons had been very, very busy. His two sons had gone to a neighboring city, again here on the map, Basra. Direct west of Basra is the city of Kufa. It also is in what is today southern Iraq. And here, his two sons had raised over 10,000 soldiers. And so now the two armies move towards each other again near Basra. Aisha and the companions and her many, many soldiers are traveling, and then they stop in a town. This is a very strange story. You already know that I like to tell you strange stories. Exactly, very good. So, they come to a town. They begin to settle down. She's riding a camel, of course. And then a number of dogs come out and they begin to bark, 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 bark. And she says to one of the companions, "Where are we?" And he says, the people tell us here that it's the village of Hawab. And she goes, "The dogs are barking." And she tells her men, "Many, many years ago, the Prophet Muhammad told me that one of my wives will go astray. She will come to a village named Hawab, and the dogs will bark, and then she will know that she has gone astray." And so Aisha says, "Okay, I'm through. I'm going home." And this is the last thing the companions want, right? Because they need her. She is the widow of Muhammad. She has tremendous authority. She has tremendous popularity. And so with tremendous efforts, they talk her out. "Oh, it was all a mistake. It isn't really Hawab after all." It isn't Hawab after all. No, it isn't Hawab after all. And so they continue on. The forces, again, converge on Basra. Ali sends a messenger, and Ali says, "Is it worth killing 5,000 to avenge 500? And Ali's cousin also sends a message to Aisha and says, "What a tragedy that Muslims who have acquired the strength of a rock are going to be smashed by colliding against each other." This was the first time that Muslims now fight against each other. It eventually becomes known as the first fitna, the first sedition, the first civil war. And so Aisha's forces enter into Basra. They kill over 600 people who don't immediately provide loyalty, don't give loyalty to them. They plunder the treasury, of course. And then they meet Ali's army, again outside of Basra. This becomes known as the Battle of the Camel, because apparently Aisha believed if she stays on the camel, you may be familiar with, in a country like this, for example, again in the Arabian world, you don't really want to sit in a saddle on top of the camel, because that gets pretty hot. You can have a little canopy over yourself. This is called a hoda. And in this hoda, again, she has a hoda. You can actually sit several people in it. Again, sort of like a platform with a canopy over it, again, provided by this camel, again, sitting on this camel. She believed that if she rides ahead of the army against Ali, Ali's forces will melt. They will see her, this famous woman, widow of Muhammad, and their resistance will crumble. And indeed, she is quite right. The camel galvanizes her soldiers. It makes the soldiers of Ali insecure. But some of Ali's closest companions, some of his closest warriors, now aim for the camel. So it really is the battle of the camel, because they're basically trying to take out the camel. Because again, she's on top and she's very, very prominent. And so apparently thousands of men lose their lives trying to protect that camel. Eventually, of course, the camel is reached and the camel is killed. And as the camel collapses, the hoda with Aisha inside collapses as well. She apparently is not badly injured, but Ali's soldiers capture her and bring her to Ali. And Ali says, "Enough is enough. Go home." And in the company of her brother, Aisha goes home. Ali then tells his soldiers, do not pursue any of her army, which is now falling apart. Enough is enough. It's over. It's over. This is actually very remarkable. Ali could certainly have taken advantage, killed more people, tried to establish himself in other ways, but no, he is a man, clearly is a man of reconciliation. He had no desire to take revenge. Now, the picture of Aisha, as you can imagine, is varied between the Sunni and the Shia. Actually, you're the Sunni, okay? So between the Sunni and the Shia, don't get mad, okay? Sunni, Shia. Thank you, very good. All right. In the Sunni tradition, she is, of course, a great woman, and she spends the last 45 years of her life in Medina. She becomes a very famous scholar. Over 2,000 traditions of Muhammad are attributed to her. Again, she becomes a great scholar. She becomes a very, very wise woman. For the Shia, they note what she has done. For the Shia, she is very, very evil, because she raised an army against Ali. Again, the first fitna, the first Muslim civil war. And there are some stories which the Shia tell, but not the Sunni. For example, one day a certain woman asked Aisha in Medina, "O mother of believers," again, this is what she becomes known as, the mother of believers, "O mother of believers, what is your opinion about a woman who kills her own child?" And Aisha said, "Such a woman shall be thrown into hell." And then the woman asked, "What will happen to a woman who killed more than 20,000 of her children?" And Aisha drove the woman out of Medina. It is estimated that over 20,000 Muslims lost their lives at the Battle of the Camel. There are some historical accounts of Ali as he enters with his troops into the city of Basra. Once again, he does not seek revenge on anyone. He actually restores the treasury to the city that had been plundered by Aisha and by the companions. And we have here from a Muslim historian, he's often called the Herodotus of the Arabs. A distinguished citizen of Basra observes as these great armies of these great armies of Ali come into the city of Basra. And he says, for example, these riders with their tremendous robes and their great men. For example, a rider came wearing a pale yellow turban and a white robe. He carried a bow on his right shoulder. The standard of his unit was in his left. He rode ahead of 1,000 cavaliers. Then another officer appeared on a beautiful white charger. His dress was white, his turban was black. He appeared to be a man of great dignity, old but with great military bearing. Then my eye caught a man on a spirited roan, his dress white, his turban black. This was the first cousin of Muhammad. Again, there were many soldiers with him. And last, I saw a man as radiant as the sun. On his right and left, there were two young men as radiant as the full moon. All three were dressed in black. Proud and prancing horses carried them, also black. And I learned that this was the general of the army, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and his two sons. This is an example of Muslim historical writing. Do you see? It is extolling, it is honorable, it shows the great magnificence, and there is probably a certain element of exaggeration in as well. The reason why this is significant is because this is not like Herodotus, famous Greek historian. At any rate, one of the reasons why modern historians believe that this very, very famous battle is called the Battle of the Camel is because they didn't want to call the battle after a woman. In current times, again, Aisha is for Sunni Muslims, for Sunni feminist Muslims, an example of female political leadership. Again, as far as the Shia are concerned, she is contemptible. Again, Aisha and the Caliph. All right, now, Ali decides to move capitals. A capital city, again, as I mentioned to you last week, is where the leader resides. In other words, it's different from Washington, D.C., where we built specific buildings for specific branches of government. So even if, for example, the next president of the United States doesn't like Washington, D.C., and decides to move to Salt Lake City. Yes, exactly. Very good. All right. The capital will still be in Washington, D.C., because that's where all the buildings and all the government officials are. But again, in human history, generally the capital is where the ruler is. And so Ali comes to the conclusion that Medina is not the best city for him. Why? Because when he needed support, all they could give him was 700 soldiers, 700 Bedouin warriors. But who provided him with the greatest numbers of warriors? It was the city of Khufu. Again, the city of Khufu, I'm sorry, one moment, here we go. Again, the city of Khufu, right here, again, provided him with thousands and thousands and thousands of soldiers. And so, logically enough, he decides to move to this city. He moved to this city, of course, not only for its support, but also because it is now far more central to this empire. And also because, again, on this map, for those of you who can see it, you notice that Khufu is much closer to Damascus with Muayyima Umayyad in charge than Medina down here is. It also has to do, by the way, with the geography. The geography here is relatively soft. The geography here is very, very harsh. In other words, again, it's much easier. In other words, Ali wants to keep an eye on the man who still has not accepted him as caliph. And so, logically enough, these two men too ultimately go to war. Before I continue with that, let me once again give to you a Shia perspective of this. The Shia believe that Ali left Medina intentionally to save the city, because the city was a holy city. This is where Muhammad had lived. This is where Muhammad reigned. This is where Muhammad taught. This is where his mosque was, which of course becomes larger and larger and larger over the course of the centuries. A capital city, a Shia historian recently wrote, in most cases, the capital of a nation also becomes the capital of vice, of crimes and other evils. Medina is the fountainhead of God's word. And it has a message to invite mankind, humanity, to live pure, noble, and chaste lives. Islam is the builder of character. There is no better example of chaste and sanctified life than that of Muhammad. If Medina had become an imperial capital, actually if it had remained an imperial capital, then Islam's invitation to the rest of humanity would have become a farce. Ali saved the sanctity of Medina by separating the spiritual and the political powers. This is actually a very interesting point. Without any question, it's a very interesting point. And so again, Ali moves to the city of Kufa. Indeed, again, according to the Shia traditions, in Kufa, Ali leads a very modest life. He does not live in a palace. He lives in a small home. He continues to help his neighbors build things. He helps to bring in crops. In other words, what the people of what the people of Kufa see is a man who shares in their daily lives. One Shia historian says Ali lived in a mud hut. Not so sure that would actually happen. It's not even in the traditions of the city of Kufa. But again, the point is made that again, he is a very, very modest and apparently a very, very spiritual man. Ali is already in his late 50s, possibly early 60s by this time. Again, as is often the case, we do not know his birth year. But again, he's a man of mature years, shall we say. And as you can see, he's caliph for only 5 years. Because Muayyima Umayyad in Damascus, finally, his patience worn out, he proclaims himself caliph. I am the rightful successor to Muhammad in Damascus. There are now 2 caliphs, and that cannot be because there can only be one successor to Muhammad. And what does that mean? A 10-minute break, exactly. Very good, thank you very much. See you then. So once again, Muayyah, he proclaims himself caliph. This, of course, is a very powerful challenge to Ali. And indeed, Muayyah begins to try to take more territory away from Ali. Again, he's gradually moving, that is, Muayyah is moving gradually from Damascus over towards Kufa. In other words, he's trying to make his claim as the true successor. I can make it very effective. And so obviously, Ali begins to make preparations to invade Syria instead. The 2 of them meet at what becomes known as the Battle of, you see it right here, the Battle of Siffin. Again, it's directly north of Damascus. Again, a red arrow, the Battle of Siffin, again, 657. It's about 10 days, and most of those 10 days actually are negotiations. Again, Ali is a negotiator. He prefers to negotiate rather than to fight, apparently. And so there's actually very, very little fighting. And then they make an accommodation, and Ali withdraws. And that creates a new Muslim sect. The reason why I mention this is because it shows how very easily this happens. There are, for example, a group of people who withdraw from Ali's armies. They are called the Khawarij. The Khawarij, they withdraw from Ali's armies because they say judgment belongs to God. The two men should have fought, because then God would have selected the victor. Their argument was, negotiation is man's work. War is God's work. That is, God decides who wins in war. And so this particular group, therefore, withdraws from Ali's army, and this sect continues for many, many centuries. Again, it becomes a very militant sect, and it is one of the major causes of instability in this part of the world. They generally tend to make war on the government. Okay. And it is men from this movement who, either through Mu'awiyah Umayyad's active engagement or passive encouragement, decide to assassinate Ali. And so indeed, 3 conspirators assemble. They go to Kufa and they wait for him in the mosque. And in the year 661 in December, Ali comes again to the great mosque of Kufa, and as he is saying his prayers, you may be familiar again with some of the Muslim/Arab traditions where you touch your forehead to the ground. I'm not going to demonstrate. I may not be able to get up. No, I'm kidding. Okay. Touch your forehead to the ground. And so Ali touches his forehead to the ground, and one of the assassins slips behind the pillar next to him, and as Ali gets up, he hits him in the forehead with the sword. The sword is also poison dipped. And so it creates a huge wound in his forehead. He, of course, is then brought home, and he lasts for 3 more agonizing days. Ultimately, it is the poison that kills him. He declares his oldest son, Hassan, to be his successor. And then again, as the Shia historians write, Ali ibn Abi Talib, again Ali, son of Abi Talib, left this world to go into the presence of his Creator, whom he had loved and served all his life. He was God intoxicated. Isn't that? It's a lovely description. So this again, Caliph Ali. And I thought, since I have today, it makes perfect sense. The first 3 caliphs that I presented to you, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, I gave you the Sunni version because they are the Sunni caliphs. I thought it would therefore be only appropriate if for Ali I provide you with the Shia version of this particular story. And so, if you will allow me, I will draw a conclusion. I will read a conclusion once again from a Shia historian, again from a couple of years ago. And it goes as follows. Now notice again the tone of the historical writing. It is very different from the Western tone. The Western tone is always, at best, skeptical. Right? Isn't it? Isn't Western history writing generally more along the skeptical lines? Okay. So here this historian, Ali, Islam's greatest saint, hero, statesman, philosopher, and martyr. Among the many Muslims who were the mourners of Ali's death, none mourned him more than the Jews, the Christians, and the Persians, because they felt him to be their protector. None mourned more than the sick, the disabled, the orphans, and the widows, because he was a father to them all. Ali was a rare combination of love of God, devotion to duty, strength tempered with tenderness, symmetry of disposition, and inflexible integrity. His greatest legacy to the world of Islam will remain forever his sublime character. Isn't that nice? Again, this is a Shia historian. And as you have probably seen on your timelines, I thought I would include some quotes from Ali as well. A wise man first thinks and then speaks. A fool speaks first and then thinks. And I thinks that there are many other wise men who have said this as well. He who has 1,000 friends has not a friend to spare. And he who has one enemy will meet him everywhere. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. A poor man is like a foreigner in his own country. No one has ever suffered from his people as I have. And if poverty were a man, I would have slain him. Okay. All right. So, Hassan makes an accommodation with Muawiyah Umayyad. And Hassan goes back to Medina, where he dies, apparently poisoned by his wife. You already begin to see that it is kind of astonishing to notice that all of these people are being killed. Only one so far has died a natural death, and that is Abu Bakr. But at any rate, within 30 years after Muhammad's death, Islam has split into several different factions. Again, these are not yet political parties. They're not yet religious sects, but they're actually developing this particular religion. And you will see this on the last page of your timeline. Again, this is the 5th page, essentially. It's similar to the one I gave you last week. I didn't get this far, so once again, I thought I would just add in a little bit of detail and bring it to you now. So again, the Sunni, they are the traditionalists because they emphasize the traditions of Muhammad. That's what it means. They honor the first 3 caliphs. Abu Bakr, remember again, that means camel daddy. Remember, camel daddy? Then Umar and Uthman. They also accept Ali, but they consider him to be the most inferior of the 4. And they say that very intentionally. He is the least of the 4. They believed that the caliph should be elected by the wise, in other words, an elective theocracy. They are called the Sunni because they believe that the traditions of Muhammad are the guide. If we don't know what to do in a particular situation, we look and see, what did Muhammad do? That's the basic idea of the Sunni. The Shia, that is the Shi'at Ali, the Shiites, again, are the followers of Ali, and they reject the first 3 caliphs. They say the first 3 caliphs had no right to rule. It was Ali all along, because they emphasize, of course, the hereditary quality of the caliphate, meaning they believe, again, the Shia believe, that Muhammad gave secret knowledge to Ali, and that every one of the successors provides the secret knowledge which helps them to rule better, a greater wisdom. But also that the family is sacred. This family is sacred. And that therefore there has to be a hereditary connection between the leaders who are called imams. What this means is that the imam has a spiritual authority which is infallible because it comes from God. So initially, again, it's all about Ali. And then it takes on more and more dimensions, political and spiritual and cultural and liturgical. It becomes more and more complicated. So as I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago, the difference between the Sunni and the Shia is very, very simple, and it's very, very messy. It's simple because it all starts with Ali, those against and those for. And then as the decades go on, there are more and more reasons for each side to differentiate and to hate the other. The Sunni do not believe the Shia are Muslims, or at best, they are schismatics and heretics. And the Shia think the same about the Sunni. One of you came up during the break and asked me, well, how can they then get along when they go on the pilgrimage to Mecca? Which is a very good question. You remember that before Muhammad, Mecca was already a pilgrimage site for 360 idols. That means there's a lot of pilgrimages going to various gods and goddesses who probably also didn't agree with each other. So again, Mecca was a no-combat zone. From 20 miles, or reckoning 20 miles outside of Mecca, you cannot fight all the way into Mecca to the Kaaba, and that still applies today. This means that when you go on the pilgrimage, you set aside your differences, and you go side by side to these various famous points of the pilgrimage. Although there are some sites that the Shia go to that the Sunni don't. In other words, again, because there are some variations here as well. So again, for the Shia, the Imam is a descendant of the Prophet. He has the highest spiritual authority, and he can interpret the Prophet's message without error. You see, in other words, this again is very, very significant. Again, the Imam is a spiritual authority. When a Shia doesn't know how to act in a specific situation, you turn not to Muhammad's traditions, you turn to the Imam, and the Imam will tell you. The Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran was an Imam. He had infallible spiritual authority as far as the Shia were concerned. Do you see? For the Sunni, an Imam is nothing more than a prayer leader. So again, this just gives you an idea again of the variations between the two. There are, of course, also the Sufi. They are sort of, I remember, one historian said the Sufi are sort of like charismatic evangelical Christians. They're very, they're very ecstatic. They believe in the ecstatic experience of not only conversion, but love of God. And they're pacifists, which is why they are hated both by the Sunni and by the Shia. And the Sufi have suffered a lot at the hands of both of them over the course of the years. All right. You will see on the 4th page that with the murder of Ali, Muawiyah Umayyad now really is the sole caliph. And with him begins a new dynasty. Now, do you see the great irony here? Muawiyah Umayyad is a Sunni who are supposed to believe in the elective traditions, but they've established a family succession. In other words, now both sides ultimately have family succession, or hereditary monarchies, essentially. Okay. Muawiyah Umayyad, again, they rule from Damascus, as you see on your handout, and as you see here on this map. So once again, the Umayyad dynasty. I love this. It's got 2 Y's in it. How cool is that, right? I mean, if you could use proper words in Scrabble, this would be awesome. Are there more? There's more than one. Oh, yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. At any rate, that should be worth like 50 points right there. Thank you. Very good. All right. So again, here's Damascus on near the Mediterranean. I'm going to just jump through this very, very quickly. A couple of points, again, I will bring this up later on in a subsequent session. What we're now going to do is, as you've noticed, I've spent a little bit of time on each of these individuals, Muhammad, Khadija, Fatima, and then the caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, which is very, very appropriate because this is the foundation. This is the foundation. And now we're going to be like that unusual creature that took Abraham on a journey across the skies. Yes, the horse with the human body, right? In other words, what we're going to do is we're going to take flight. In other words, I could, but but I'm not going to go through every single one of the caliphs of the Umayyad dynasty, right? It's actually very, very interesting. There's no question about it. This is actually very, very interesting. But we're now going to take flight. In other words, we're going to fly across these various dynasties. I do, however, want to point out a couple of things. The first is that this Umayyad dynasty, or essentially the Umayyad leadership of the caliphate now as it exists, the majority of its population is not Muslim. The majority of its population is Christian, and then Jewish and Persian. Muhammad had apparently stated explicitly that the Abrahamic religious groups, that would be the Jews and the Christians, should be allowed to practice their own religion as long as they pay the appropriate taxes. We Americans, of course, have very allergic reactions to the words taxes. But the thinking behind this was that since the Muslims provide security, the non-Muslims should pay their fair share for that security. The welfare system, again, taking care of both Muslim and non-Muslim poor widows and orphans, which had been inaugurated by Umar, is also initially continued by this Umayyad dynasty as well. And in addition, the Christian and Jewish populations, in part often very, very large, were allowed not only to practice their own religion, but to continue to follow their own laws. In other words, they had considerable autonomy at this time. Indeed, one of the Muayyim, I can do this, okay. One of Muayyima Umayyad's wives was a Christian. All right, how about that? Okay. And so the fact that Muayyima Umayyad allowed the Christians and the Jews to continue following their traditions, their laws, and their religion was enormously strengthening to his popularity. It greatly strengthened this dynasty at the beginning. Okay. Muayyima Umayyad is, I think, the only one of this dynasty that dies a natural death. He gets really sick, possibly pneumonia, we're not entirely sure. But before his death, he appoints one of his sons, Yazid, as his successor. So Yazid, you'll see him next in your handout, is the second caliph of this caliphate. And he is good friends with the other son of Ali, a man by the name of Hussein, who also lives in Medina. And then the people, this is actually very interesting, the people of Kufa, where of course Ali had been killed, the people of Kufa ask Hussein, the youngest son of Ali, the only surviving son of Ali, to come from Medina to Kufa and to reside there instead. And so Hussein, against the advice of many friends, takes his family and many of his companions, and they move up towards Kufa, where they are intercepted by the army of Yazid, and they are all slaughtered. They are all slaughtered, not only Hussein, but also his wives, his children, his brother, again, the brothers and sisters of the wives and of his friends. Again, they're all slaughtered. Furthermore, Hussein's head is cut off and brought to Yazid. Yes. The head of Hussein. Yazid is killed by his horse. It's painful. Yeah, it is really painful. All right, okay. For those of you who've gone riding, you know what I mean, right? Yazid slips off his horse panics and tramples him to death. Okay. And then it gets a little bit more chaotic. Let me just move down a little bit. You will see here again, after Yazid, there are several more caliphs. Notice the short reigning dates. 680 to 683, that's never a good sign. 683 to 684, that's not good. 684, 685, something's happening. And then we come to Abd al-Malik, who reigns for a much longer period of time. and he builds a very, very famous building. Several of you have already asked me about this. It is the very famous Dome of the Rock. Here is the city of Jerusalem. Again, a very, very ancient city, as you know, the city of New Peace, again, according to some interpretations of the name. And this area right here, again, on the picture, if you can't see my little pointer, towards the middle of, again, on the left to the middle, this is called the Temple Mount. This is where the first Jewish temple, the Temple of Solomon, was built. It was then, of course, destroyed by the Babylonians. Then a smaller second temple was built, which was expanded over the centuries. The last great expansion of this temple occurred under the king Herod, and then it was destroyed by the Romans, and it has not been, as you can see, and as you know, it has not been rebuilt. But again, this is the very, very famous Temple Mount. Now, there are several stories here. The first is that beneath the Temple Mount, there is a rock. And this rock is very, very sacred. According to the Jewish traditions, this is where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, and is prevented from doing so by the angel. According to Muslim traditions, this is where Abraham was going to sacrifice Ishmael, not Isaac, and is prevented from doing so by an angel. This is the rock over which the Holy of Holies was built of the Jewish temple. The Jewish temple no longer exists at the time of Muhammad, but Muhammad has a very amazing experience. Some historians believe that when Muhammad first moved to Medina, again from Mecca to Medina, that he prayed towards Jerusalem, that he didn't pray towards the Kaaba in Mecca, that he prayed towards Jerusalem. That may have been a way for him to try to bring the Jewish community in Medina also into his fold, essentially. And so the story goes that one night, either he journeyed towards Jerusalem or he was intercepted as he was in Medina by the angel Gabriel and by this famous mystical horse with the human body, Burak, and they went to Jerusalem. Muhammad prayed at this rock. Then Gabriel put him on this magical horse. The horse kicked off from the rock and flew into heaven. And Muhammad could therefore see all the different 7 levels of heaven. He saw the great prophets. He saw Moses. He saw Isaiah, he saw Jesus, spoke briefly with them, briefly even saw the veiled presence of God, looked down, saw the 7 levels of hell and all the great torments, and then the horse came back, the same horse that had carried Abraham so long ago. The horse brought him back to Jerusalem, and then he was returned to Medina. This becomes known as Muhammad's night journey. Now, Muhammad's night journey continues to exist in both the Sunni and the Shia traditions. The issue about whether Muhammad initially prayed towards Jerusalem and then changed his mind when he could not bring the Jewish community on his side and returned to pray towards Mecca is very controversial in Muslim circles. Most Muslims do not believe this. There is a reference in the Quran where Muhammad says, "What difference does north or south, east or west make?" Which some historians believe is a remnant of that switch from one direction to the other. But again, it's very, very controversial. But the night journey is not. The night journey, again, is a fundamental belief of the Muslims. So, here again we have an aerial view of this core part of Jerusalem. I'm sure that some of you have been to Jerusalem, may have been here as well. Let me just point this out to you. Again, this is the Temple Mount. Again, this is where the temple was located. And this is where the Umayyad dynasty builds a mosque. This is one of the oldest original Muslim buildings. Now, you remember last week, was it last week when we talked about, yes, it was, when we talked about the Roman Empire, right? You were stunned to discover I was starting to talk about the Roman Empire. And remember I mentioned Byzantium and its tradition of building 8-sided churches. Take a look at this building. This mosque, it is 8-sided. It has a dome just like the Byzantine churches. In other words, notice this. Muslim architecture takes its inspiration from Byzantine architecture. Right? Also, just as a sidelight, this is a Christian church originally, and this is the famous Western Wall. Again, for Jews, the Western Wall is very important because it's believed to be the only remaining wall or segment of Solomon's temple. The Westerners like to call it the Wailing Wall because Jews cry there for obvious reasons. It's a little derogatory. Western Wall is actually the much better description. But again, 3 major world religions literally within a stone's throw of each other. It's in some ways, again, it makes the city a remarkable city and a very tragic city at the same time. Here, for example, is a Byzantine church. Again, it's near Jerusalem. It's on the way between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. And you'll see again that you see the foundations are still 8-sided. Right? Indeed, some historians believe that parts of this building were actually transported to Jerusalem to build this famous Dome of the Rock, again, this Muslim building. Again, this is the layout of this famous Muslim building. Again, 8-sided, and here we go. You'll see that it has very, very beautiful tile work. The Byzantines were famous for their tile work. So once again, they're taking Byzantine models. One other thing that I want to mention at this particular point, is the perfect time to mention it, is that again, many, many Muslims, especially the more fundamentalist Muslims, accept the 10 Commandments in a very literal sense. The second commandment says, you will make no images of man, of birds, of fish, etc., etc. This proved to be enormously difficult for Christians because it seemed to say that painting and sculpture are out. Do you see? And the Muslims follow in this line of thinking, that you cannot make images of people. And therefore, again, this is why I mentioned that when I show you pictures of Ali and Muhammad, again, they are standard interpretations of these individuals, but many Muslims would object to this. Because again, according to the Muslims, you cannot make images. And therefore, it dominates, or in other words, this law therefore dominates the arts. Because therefore there are no sculptures of animals or of birds or fish or people. The only form of ornamentation therefore are geometric designs and the calligraphy. That is the quotations from the Quran itself, which become, again, this calligraphy, a very, very beautiful form of ornamentation. Here again, the tile work. This is from a recent restoration. Again, very beautiful tile work. Again, Byzantine in form. Then notice, again, the very beautiful geometric patterns. And notice also here, the broad band. Again, these are quotations from the Quran. Again, the exterior of this, the Dome of the Rock, because again, it's built over the rock from which Muhammad and his horse kicked off. The rock where Muhammad tried to sacrifice, where Abraham tried to sacrifice Ishmael, or where Abraham tried to sacrifice Isaac. All right. This again, the building, and this is the interior. It's a terrible shot, I'm afraid. It's from a book, it's a centerfold, it's unfortunate, but it does allow me to illustrate several points. Notice the capitals of the columns, they're Corinthian columns. It's a very typical Greek, then Roman, then Byzantine form. Again, and as is the black and white striping. The black and white striping was also a very typical decoration of the Byzantine churches at this time. In other words, again, it has many, many qualities of Byzantine architecture. Here again, a cutaway, then you can see the holy rock beneath it, again, beneath the dome itself. Again, a view up towards the dome, and this is the dome itself. This is really magnificent. This becomes very, very typical of Muslim architecture, because what this very beautiful, intricate design is supposed to show is you're looking into the gardens of paradise. In other words, again, you're looking into the gardens of the heavens. Then beneath this floor is another story, again, another floor, and that's where the rocket... Oh, sorry. It's okay. Life is good. We're solid here, okay. Again, now we're all awake. Thank you. At any rate, this is the rock, again, from which the horse kicked off, and according to the guides who will show you there, they will show you where the hoof print of the horse is, that you can still see there. Again, for some of you who've been there, you probably know this, because this actually is open to tourists. Of course, you have to have respective clothing, and it varies on occasion, but again, it is open to tourists. Again, this is the rock of the Dome of the Rock. The rock once again, and once again, the church. All right. Then we have, here again, this is the Western Wall, again, very, very important for the Jews, the Dome of the Rock. But some of you asked about the Masjid al-Aqsa. The Masjid al-Aqsa is also on the Temple Mount. Masjid is the Arabic word for mosque. It means the place of prostration, where once again the forehead to the floor. And this Masjid al-Aqsa also has a rock from which Muhammad kicked off to go into heaven. They're both on the Temple Mount, and there are two competing traditions. Do you see? It's not entirely clear which one is the actual real rock. The one in the Dome of the Rock is much larger. This one here is much smaller. And if you take a look at this building, it looks very, very much like a Romanesque Christian cathedral. Again, ironically enough. All right. Again, this mosque at the end is what it's called. Again, the mosque at the end of the world. And here we have in the front, you will see this mosque right here. You'll see the mosque in the front and the Dome of the Rock behind it. Again, the great Temple Mount. On the left, the mosque. In the center, the Dome of the Rock. Again, built by the Umayyad dynasty. It has Quranic excerpts, and I wanted to read just one of them to you. It's an inscription, again, in the mosaic frieze. It's from the Quran, and it is considered blasphemy by Christians. This is one of the reasons why it is often repeated by Muslims. So peace is upon me the day I was born, and the day I die, and the day I shall be raised alive, which actually corresponds to Judaism, to Christianity, as well as to Islam. Such is Jesus, Son of Mary. It is a statement of truth about which they doubt. It is not befitting to the majesty of God that God should give birth to a son. Glory be to him. He determines all. He only has to say be, and it is. In other words, a re-emphasis on the fact that God cannot have a son. God is whole and alone. So again, the Dome of the Rock, the Umayyad dynasty. Shall I give away the ending? The Umayyad dynasty has a very unfortunate end. It is actually a really terrible end. In other words, starting next week, bring boots, because the blood will be flowing considerably. Thank you very much. Have a great day.